Welcome to the Wally Report. Listen, we're back once again for part 2 of our special Wally Report true crime series focusing on HBO's award-winning docuseries, The Jinx. I know everybody loved part 1, and now we're about to hit you with an even more entertaining part 2, baby. Again, I'm returning with our super just new co-host, Sean Stafford Sereno. For folks that missed episode 1, Stafford is an actor, a screenwriter, a digital content creator, and a true crime expert. So, Stafford, we're excited to have you back. How are you doing on this fine Sunday?
I'm doing great this Sunday. Thank you. It's playoff Sunday.
Yeah. So, okay, let's set the stage for this episode, okay? So, just in case people missed episode 1, we talked about all good things. We talked about episodes 1 through 3 of The Jinx Show, end of the podcast, okay? And then today, we're going to take it home, at least for season 1. And we're going to talk about episodes 4 through 6 of the show, end of the podcast, okay? And I just got to say, like, rewatching this is probably my 3rd time through. It's been such a pleasure. It's still amazing. Every time you go through it, I pick up new things. And I'm like, I just want to open it up to your feelings. You obviously feel this. Like, what are your thoughts now getting to this? Is your 4th time through,
This
right?
probably
Or 5th?
No, it's probably my 4th. Like I feel like it's an old shoe at this point. Like the story is just it's so fascinating every time. I do pick up on tiny little things, and there's so many twists and turns in the story that even though I've watched it 3 times, I'm like, wait, what order did this happen in, and how did this get discovered, and what the timeline is very tricky. So it's always entertaining every time.
Yeah, it's like I feel like I can't get enough of it, even though now I'm like, we're becoming super, specialists and experts. Now more questions are arising. There's also like time gaps. I'm really fascinated by like, well, what happened from like 82 to 99? Like, and like some of the gap years that the story doesn't usually cover. Like after he kind of just got away with Kathy, what happened for the next 17 years? I guess he was just working, but was there ever pressure? Just weird things like that I'm very curious about
same.
now. So, okay, before we get into the meat of the show, let's take a quick break from our sponsors. Okay, and we're back to the show. Very ready today. I mean, there's so much to talk about here. So I'm going to try to, let's talk about the big points. But okay, episode 4. We set the stage. The state of Texas versus Robert Durst. This is a hot sode. It's episode 4. Like I said, before we get into Dick DeGuerin, which is like, they're these unbelievable larger than life characters that come into this show. But really quickly, let's discuss the beginning of episode 4. Bob is now, they've brought it back to Bob in jail because he's waiting for the trial. And there's that fucking amazing picture.
Oh my God, the prison
of him and the inmate
That's
squatting.
the first thing I wrote was that prison photo. Oh my God.
Like what? So do you think because he was like, he must have got respect from these inmates right away because they know of him, like probably up for a triple homicide at this point, right? And they probably didn't bug him. Or
I'm
what
sure
do you think?
He was entertaining to them just as much as he is to the viewing audience. He's funny. He's weird. He's got a charm to him. Even just the way he talks, I'm sure they got a kick out of him.
Yeah, so it looked like he was totally embraced by them. I mean, he's literally squatting gangster style in this photo. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. Okay, so let's take it over to the trial. In comes Dick DeGuerin, right? That he kind of strolls in like a Texas fat cat, is like I think they used to say in the oil days. And he just comes in and he makes this ridiculous statement of like, looks like a beautiful day in Galveston to me. And he saunters all in with Michael Ramsey behind him, like all cocky. And so my first question though and just comment. I want to get your thoughts on this. Is like, yes, he's sort of a lovable character or whatever, and he's got a lot of confidence. But it's crazy to me that with the evidence against them, that they even thought that they could put a case
Yeah.
together. Like, I mean, he literally has chopped up the body. So really quickly, your thoughts on how the fuck did they even have the confidence from the beginning to even want to fucking take the case, like, at all?
Well, money played a large part of it. And I always think that that conversation that
Yes.
he has with
Okay.
his wife over the phone is chilling and just very telling. You rarely get to get that kind of a glimpse into behind the scenes of how this stuff actually works. Like, oh, here's this amount of money, and that should do it. About how justice
Right.
works for rich
Yeah.
people. I thought the case that they built was fascinating, and the fact that it worked is just, I mean,
Oh my
blaming
God.
Janine Pirro for him having basically for everything is crazy work. I mean, if he didn't have to go to
Yeah.
Galveston, he never would have murdered Morris Black. So it's basically her fault.
Yeah. So, oh yeah, we're gonna definitely get into that part. So, what I found, you're right. The whole thing going back to his wife and the phone call with like, well, I'm gonna all in 1-8, and I hope that gets me
Right.
acquitted. I think I've seen it too much. I can quote the damn show
Yeah.
now. But yeah, they dropped 1.8 million on these guys. So obviously, if they're gonna take the case, I guess you're right. It's still just such like a. I can't believe they even thought they would have a case. So before we get back to that, because I want to dissect what they did. I just have a note to just talk about Galveston again, because I
Mm,
meant to talk about this in the first episode. Why the fuck is he okay?
I don't get it.
So we know that he couldn't run internationally because he had given his passport. Remember that
Yeah.
little thing I told you last time? He had given his passport to his lawyer when Pirro was first after him. So I guess he couldn't go internationally, even though I said like, hey, when he was on the run, he could have fucking gone to Canada. But whatever. Before that, why Galveston? So it's weird because he's in New York half of his life. He's in California a lot, which is going to come up. Galveston, Texas seems like the weirdest fucking place. Now I looked on a map and it is sort of the middle of nowhere. And I think it's into the Gulf of Mexico. And if you ever look it up, it's really weird. It's sort of like isolated middle of
Uh-huh.
nowhere.
It's also
It's just such a weird choice. Like, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm from Louisiana. I'm from New Orleans. So when I was younger, we used to vacation in Galveston. And actually, my family, this past Christmas, I didn't go with them, but my family, they all took a road trip and rented a huge house there. And they were in Galveston for like 4 days. So it is actually, as shame as it kind of looks in the documentary, they don't really showcase it as being like a nice place to visit, but it actually is kind of a little of a vacation town for people that live like, southern Louisiana and Texas.
Right. Okay, that's good that you have other insights on it, because I'm just thinking though. Okay, at the timeline at this point, he's shot Susan Berman the year before. Okay, he then is now they're reopening the case, and now he's like decides to dress as a woman and go on the run. It's just so weird. What still
Why
I don't understand
Galveston?
Galveston. Why not go to like Hawaii in a hut somewhere, or I just like I mean the one thing I was thinking about was gun laws, and
The
that comes
stand your
up later with
ground
Morris
stuff.
Black. He was a gun
Hmm.
guy. Did he purposely go to Texas?
I could see that.
Because of being able to protect himself with guns if other people came
The
after
fact
him?
that he made a point of saying that in the subsequent interview, he went into detail about what states do and don't have certain gun laws, which
Yes.
obviously he did his research on that. So yeah, it was either there or Florida.
I get, yeah, exactly. So maybe that I just don't get where Texas came into his life. Anyway, maybe I need to research a little bit more. So what? Okay, one other thing I have for you here that's always kind of boggled my mind. Going back to the Durst family, he's obviously he's been part of the trust. He gets paid out. Who knows how
I was
much
actually
money
wondering
he gets
about that.
monthly or yearly?
Sorry, I just wondered. That was a question that I had from the last episode. Like, how do these trusts work? Like, how did he get the money for this trial?
Yes.
Because they were already paying for their own lawyer for his trial, and he was like, "No, I don't want him." And the wife was like, "I don't like him." And so they got their own lawyer. They're just dishing money out to him for a new trial. I mean, it's just interesting.
So I think when Seymour set the trust up when they're kids, They all get small percentage of the company monthly or yearly, no matter what else is happening. They just get money that's just that's just put into the trust that they can almost extract like it's a bank account. And it seemed like he was basically paid in this trust for his entire life, which is what his wife wants to get hold of later in season 2, remember? So he just is getting millions of dollars every year from this trust, it seems like, no matter what he does.
Okay.
But my question, and I'd love to have an expert come onto our show one time and explain the Durst Trust and the aspects. But here's my question for you. I feel like when someone starts getting into criminal activity, couldn't they, I'm surprised Douglas never took, tried to maybe get Robert removed from this trust because of run-ins with the law. There's got to be something to where if you are negatively impacting the image of the company because of criminal activity, can't they remove you from a fucking trust?
It might be a lot harder to do.
It seems weird,
since the father was dead by that point, right?
You're right. I guess the father's already dead by Galveston, but I just mean in general, like, it couldn't have Douglas now being the new chairman. It just blows my mind he was never like removed somehow because of his run-ins with the law. But if he's never like actually convicted, then maybe they don't have.
If they think that Bob, which they do, because he gets all these restraining orders, that he is a dangerous person, he probably just doesn't want to rock that boat at all because he's afraid for his own life.
That's also possible. Or I wonder if stuff was going behind the scenes and then that's what then made Bob come after. And this is going to be a topic later of him when he actually goes towards Douglas's house. So I want to get your thought on that. Okay, let's go back to the murder here because I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but these are just different things that come up in this episode that really like, so obviously he's gone, through the episode now, he's on trial. They do a great job humanizing him. They even have the jury laugh at one point, which is like a turning point. He dresses as a woman. He, it's a really crazy part of the story. He befriends Morris. A couple of things that I know we talked about this last time, but we're going to get into the amazing defense, but I just feel like there's no fucking way that you chop up the body if this is self-defense. I mean, I know in the case they argued that way, but come on. I mean, just like, I know we already talked about this, but let me just get your feelings one more time. I mean, let's say it was you or me. We go home to our apartment. A neighbor is there. They pull a gun on us. You wrestle them. The gun goes off and they get shot. Do you actually think I'm going to chop up this body and get rid of it, or do you call the cops? And I know it's different for him because he was already on the run for previous murders. He just shot Susan Berman a year before, and obviously he's crazy. But anyway, what's your thoughts on that?
If I was already being investigated for another murder, like of my wife, I could see someone thinking I can't go to the cops. Would I then literally chop up a body? Personally, no. I have a weak stomach. Could never do that. But I probably would have found another way. I would have maybe left it there and just run again. You're already on the lam.
Yes. Yeah, and the apartment's rented not even under his name to Dorothy Siner. I'm sure his DNA would have been all over the apartment, so they would have found it. But yeah, he could have maybe run, or he could have, remember how he said he could have just put a sleeping bag on and just dragged it out? I feel like that, but it's so hard to lift the body up into the car.
He's a small guy.
And he was older. Yeah. Okay, fine. Okay, now let's come back to this one thing and then let's go into this amazing defense. Remember how last episode, and I know I jumped ahead a little bit, but then you got to see episode 4 about the whole head. So very clearly, he goes back to the bags. He cuts the bags open, gets the head, and then gets rid of it somewhere else. So I just wanted to go back, since we didn't get to talk about it a lot last time. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when they say in the trial, or I don't know if it was in the trial. It was one of the detectives. What was his, Cody? I think. I love
mustache. That guy, the guy from Texas. Yes, what a great character. He says my
theory is that he shot him just point blank in the back of the head. And there's no defense. There's no defense against that. So you have to get rid of the head, which is okay. So when they're demonstrating in the courtroom about how the struggle went down, the way they were doing it, it led me to believe that, like, okay, so he's saying that he shot him in what, the neck, the front of the face,
The front of the face, I think the front, yeah, right through the head or
which
something in the
the odds
front.
on that actually, I mean, that's just so far fetched. But the jury
Yeah.
ate all of it.
Yeah.
He had very good lawyers and obviously was very convincing on the stand, which we find out later that he practiced and practiced and practiced, which is anyone should do that. You're a fool if you're going to get up on the stand and you're not
Yes.
going to rehearse what you're going to say. Obviously, that's what lawyers work with defendants about all the time. Um, but the fact that he
Yeah.
was very seeing in these interviews in the documentary of what, like, how weird he comes across, the fact that he was so charming and convincing on the stand, he's just all over the place. It's hard to pin this guy down.
Yeah, so let's talk about that defense. So it was sort of like amazing if you think about it. They set up this thing that there's the burden to disprove self-defense. That was a big thing. And then the way that they masterfully separated murder charge and the dismemberment
Yeah.
was obviously
Mhm.
crazy, but was their only real, it was brilliant in the end,
Yeah.
of course, because they got everybody to say, listen, the murder was an accident. He thought he was going to
Well,
be
it's not murder,
blamed.
it's an accident.
So of course he has to. Right. Sorry, the
Yeah.
killing that was an accident, right? And so they did a great job, especially once they humanized him and they had them laughing and they liked him, it seemed
Mhm.
like, which is just so insane because you look at all the pictures of the dismemberment and they still end up liking this
Yeah.
guy. But yeah, that's so let's just talk about that again. I know you already mentioned it, but it really was a pretty brilliant job by the defense to go that way because it ended up working.
Yeah. Very brilliant. I mean, not to get on my little feminist soapbox here, it was also brilliant of them to be like, okay, we're in Texas. Let's pin this uppity New York,
Mm.
A coastal elite, DA. She's not liberal, but DA, and
Yeah,
let's make
yes, I
her the
got you.
villain because we're
Yeah.
down here in, like, this, the southern small community. They'll really respond to that, and they totally did. They ate it up, hook, line, and sinker.
Totally. Good point. Yeah, they were like, oh my, even that the juror was like, yeah, that dang Janine Pirro. I was very believable. She ran him out of town. And what was Bob to do? I mean,
Exactly.
he was just defending himself. Yeah, it was unbelievable. So we get to the not guilty scene. That is fucking we talk about. Okay, there's a couple moments in this show that are
Mhm.
legendary, that are like very, very like emotionally moving, epic, or whatever. And again, we're not defending the Durst side here, but that scene
Yeah.
is so unbelievable, right? Like him like
He
cinematically
didn't
or
even know what they
dramatically or
said. He
whatever
even,
you want to
when he
call it.
asked the lawyer, what did they say? Not guilty? Like, he wasn't even sure.
Oh my
He
God,
blacked
just the
out.
whole. Yes. It's just a jaw-dropping scene. They do a close-up. They put this dramatic music. He has to go over, like, and I like how they do that with the captions there to talk to his
Mhm.
lawyer. Like, what an unbelievable. I mean, also, you're just like thinking, if you are Bob at that point, what a sigh of relief that this fucking worked.
That it actually worked.
I mean,
And at
just.
that point, just whatever,
Yeah.
everything that happens after it, it's like, you literally got away with murder, and now you're just going to squander it by making all
Yeah.
these stupid, unforced errors. I'm not saying that he should have, like, once again, not siding
Yeah.
with him. I'm just saying from his perspective,
Yeah.
the fact that you would then go on and just throw it all away when you got away with it is baffling.
Oh my God. So one other thing I forgot to cover, and then we'll move on, is the other thing that blew my mind was not only with the defense, was not only did they go for this crazy defense, which is like in rational sense does not make sense.
Yeah.
Like it's just, I mean, the way but the one thing I thought was insane was they not only did they then have the cojones, if you will, because we're down in Texas right now, to put Bob on the
Right,
stand,
which you're not supposed to
but
do.
also do him as the first fucking
I know,
witness.
which they say.
It was like they went right into
Yeah,
it.
and they say in so many, like, legal drama TV shows that I've seen, it's like you don't put your client on the witness stand, because you don't want them to incriminate themselves. Which, as we see later, he's very capable of incriminating himself. So he's also what do you call it? He's very unpredictable. So
Oh my God. Yeah. But I guess they tested it. And one of the other guys was like, actually, we thought he'd be, and like, I'm just so surprised they went with it. But, and you know what? And I know I'm jumping ahead a little
Hmm.
bit here, but, have it in the podcast. There's a little soundbite from Dick
Uh-huh.
DeGuerin. The reason why they did that. And again, we'll go back to this a little bit later, but they talk about the decision to have him testify because basically it gives the ability for the jury to directly to see if they believe this son of a bitch or
Hmm.
not. That was his words. I love that line. And that they knew it was the only way that they could win is get this prick on the stand, humanize him, somehow get them to believe him was probably because if they didn't put him up there and they just looked at the evidence, he was fucked. They had to risk
Well,
doing
they
this.
realized that he had the personality that could win over a jury, and they were right. Because if he was up there acting shady, acting shifty, and they're like he's very unlikable, he's very off-putting, they wouldn't have tried that. But because there's something, and this is the thing, I think you have to be same with Jarecki. You have to be in the room with the guy to realize that he has this charm because it really does not come across. I mean, he could be a little funny, but he does seem like a weirdo. And so there's
Yeah.
obviously something that with him
Yes.
in the room with people that he's very effective. So
It's
yeah, it is.
unbelievable. Yeah. So, okay, here's one other question I have for you.
Hmm.
I don't feel like they probably would have risked it because this isn't like 1920 Chicago, Al Capone
Right.
era. But is there any fucking way that they got to some of these juries and paid somebody off?
I could see it.
Or is this too modern era? You can't do that
I
anymore.
mean, the way that one guy, even in the documentary, was talking about how he really thought he still thinks he's a good guy. He still thinks that like they made the right decision. Um, is says to me like, why is he so convinced of this? Like, it's he dismembered somebody.
Yeah. Right. I wonder, I just don't know like if you would have risked it because you get in a lot of trouble for attempted jury
Uh huh.
tampering that, but it was 2001 in Texas. It was a long, now 25
Uh
years
huh.
ago. And we know Robert loves to befriend everybody after and pay for things. And so I
Well,
get it after
that's.
he started hiring that guy's, you know, but could they have actually like said, fuck it, I'm literally going to send one of my friends or just some random private, whoever, fixer to just go and be like, yeah, we'll just, you have that debt on your home. Yeah, we'll pay that off
I
and blah.
think
I don't know. I
people still
mean,
get in trouble for witness tampering. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. You
right.
know.
And with his money, you know what I mean? If he's going to drop 1.8 on the fucking Dick DeGuerin and company, you can't drop a couple of, 50 grand here or there, maybe on some jurors.
Yeah. Exactly.
So
Yeah. No,
anyway,
I totally think that,
okay.
especially down there, I totally think it was something that could have happened.
And the reason why this came to me is that exact guy, but also this one blew me
Hmm.
away. They said during deliberation that at one point only 3 out of all of them had guilty votes. Like, that's that. Like, how
Yeah.
is that believable? So I just wonder if they got to a couple of these jurors.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was crazy, right? The only what is it, 12 total or is it 10?
I think it's.
How do we know?
I think there's 12 on a jury. Yeah, 12 angry men.
It's
12
12.
angry
Yeah,
men.
12.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you. Okay. So the last thing I'll say here is this was a great strategic thing that they do dramatically with the doc, which is also what makes the doc so compelling because it's not just the story, but how Andrew Jarecki and team pull this
Uh-huh.
off. At the end of episode 4, if you remember this, they show Bob talking to himself on the
Okay,
fucking
I wrote
mic,
that down.
rehearsing,
I wrote that down.
and his lawyer comes up,
Uh-huh.
right? And says, hey, they can hear
Yeah.
you. And that sets the stage for, of course, the big ending. They do that nicely. And it's like, oh my God, it's so funny that a lawyer was here for this one, but not later. And
Yeah.
so I just wanted to bring that one up. Yeah, what are your thoughts on how they nicely put that in there to realize, hey, Bob might fucking talk to himself at some point in this
Yeah,
show?
well, they, at the end of it or on the podcast, they said that they didn't realize until a year later that he had done that. Like they weren't setting
Right.
him up. It was just within the editing of the documentary, they set it up because it's a pattern that he kept
Yeah.
forgetting that he was wearing, that he didn't know what a hot mic was. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what was my big takeaway here. I'm like, oh, I love
Oh.
how they squeeze that in there. Right? Yeah. Well, in the first one, in this one, I think he just says, I did not willingly tell a lie. And then he was like rehearsing what he needs to say to Andrew whenever Andrew
And that
comes
one, yes.
back. I
Then there
did
was
not
another one. Yeah.
willingly. Yeah. Well, the later one at the end was all disjointed wacko. Okay. So real quick, and I want to double check if you have notes that I missed, but in the podcast, the other things, okay, I already brought up the Dick DeGuerin. I just got to say it again. I loved how they said they knew that the only way was to get the jury to see him directly and to believe this son of a bitch. Okay. The other thing that I love that they did was I don't really love the phrase, but it's a Dick DeGuerin special, was embrace the ugly baby technique.
I love that phrase.
They purposely, but they purposely go and say, before the prosecution can use these things, it's okay, talk about your childhood, talk about Kathy, because you know they're going to try to fucking bring that up. Talk about all these other things and give your reasonings already. So then the jury has time to be like, oh, yeah, all right, I guess I kind of believe his story, right? Instead of letting it come up later and making you look really bad, almost embrace it early.
Brings up all the mistakes that he made before Jarecki can. So it's a way of disarming people by saying, well, I'll just air all the dirty laundry before you get a chance to, and that way I'm not guilty.
Yeah, he almost learned that technique nicely, right? Give him a couple smaller things and like, oh, he's admitting things. He's an honest guy. I don't think, he probably didn't do the murder then. You know, you give him a couple small breadcrumbs. Yeah, it's like and then, okay, going back to my question about the guns and Texas. This then also was highlighted in the podcast nicely and in the episode, but I wrote it down for the podcast here because it struck me again that in the laws in the state of Texas allows you to almost do anything with an intruder.
It's the stand your ground law. I mean, that's what it's called in Florida. I don't know if that's the same, but that's essentially what it is.
Yeah. And then, you know, so that was just really interesting, right? And I wonder if that's why he's fucking later, he lives in Houston too, that if you find Bob in Texas a lot because of these weird fucking laws, I don't, you know, if someone comes after me, you know, I can fucking shoot him and get away with it. Last thing, and then I want to see if you have any additional notes I missed before we go on to episode 5. I really like this here. Because this is the one thing that, like, it's very obvious, Kathy, we've already talked at length why we think Bob killed her. We also, the Susan Bourbon, we already talked about it. We're going to go back into it in the next episode, obviously. But that's quite obvious. The Morris Black is the most, I think, head scratching of the murders, because it's like, okay, he's your neighbor. He obviously is supposedly like an annoying guy and was bugging him and was kind of like a dick or whatever. But it's still sort of a bit puzzling. Like, yes, we think that he obviously finds out who he is. He probably threatens him and says, I'm going to tell the cops who you are, that you're hiding out here, even if you don't help me with my eviction issue or my charity, which is the whole fucking thing with the charity was ridiculous. Or like, that was weird. But either way, we know that most likely he threatens him. I just feel like, is that enough to fucking shoot another person when you just shot Susan? Like, it just, like, there's still issue for me on the mystery of exactly why he fucking decides to shoot Morris Black. So I wanted to get, what are your thoughts if you really had to guess on exactly what went down between these two old arguing guys? I mean, it's just very fucking weird.
I mean, I do think threatening that you're going to go to the police is enough. I mean, he already, did it with Susan Berman. Yes, but why is he going to back off now if he's on a, he's on a roll? Also, the one thing I wanted to bring up is when we were talking about last episode, the frustrating like inconsistencies and dumb mistakes that he makes. Like, you went to all this trouble to disguise yourself as a woman, live under a fake name. Why did you then tell him who you really were? Like, once again, another unforced error. Like, if you're going to go and do this and be on the lam, then go fully into it. He just does it sometimes, and then sometimes he doesn't.
He probably just, I think, like, again, the story, who knows what's really true, but over time, supposedly, like, they became friends, and it was probably hard to keep up. You can't talk, and then he obviously wasn't.
Well, then one of the cops says, I don't believe for a second that they were actually friends.
Yes. That's
So
true, but maybe just they kept bumping into each other in the fucking hallways. Who
it was
knows
too hard
what
to keep up the
really
mute
there's
act.
so that yeah, probably over time. He's there for months
Yeah.
and yeah. But yeah, that's the one that's still the most mysterious to me
Mm.
of like how the fuck are you getting in fights with your 70-year-old, 71-year-old Nate?
To your question, I mean, I do kind of see, even though he had just killed somebody, I could see him being like, once again, being backed into a corner. You're threatening me much in the same way that she did. So triggering, literally.
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
Yeah,
I could
yeah.
see, and also we just can't forget, he is not mentally all there. He's not a mentally stable person, so
Right.
I could see him doing it. And in a because this guy Morris
Okay.
Black was known to be like kind of an asshole. He was always fighting with people. I could see it getting into a heated argument, and then he just did it.
Yes. Okay, so real quick before we take another break, and was there anything from your notes on this one that was real hot that I missed? Or did we cover most of the main topics you wanted to
No, that was
cover
pretty
here?
much. I didn't have anything extra for that one.
Okay. Okay, cool. I just want to double check in case I'm missing stuff this episode. Okay, so let's take another break from our sponsors really quickly. Okay, and we're back big time. This is only going to get crazier because that was more of like a setup episode for the final two that are just these juggernauts of all time episodes. Episode 5, family values. This episode, basically dives into the Durst family and the McCormick family dynamics about the going back to the disappearance of Kathy and just how sad and fucked up the whole thing kind of was, and then just the complete silence from the Durst side, which to me is inexcusable. It also is way more suspicious. I'm going to get into a lot of stuff, but before we go into my feelings and my big highlights from this episode, I do want to say we've already talked about the theme song, but I also wanted to bring up whoever found like sort of the music that's played throughout the
Yeah.
is fucking amazing. Like whoever got that, whoever developed that song, I didn't see who did the music for this
Yeah.
show. They deserve 16 Academy rewards. Okay. How do you feel about
The
that?
music is great. All of it. I like the editing, the music. It all ties into what we respond to and why it's a great documentary series. It's not just the
Yeah.
content and Bob Durst. It's all of it put together and how it was put together and how they
Yeah.
weaved all the stories together. And then, the visuals and the sound all together create this feeling that you get when you're watching it. So it's all important. I'm trying to.
I feel like we need a new hit project from our boy Jarecki because he did
Sure, he's working on
he did
something,
wonders
right?
here. It's got to be. Yeah, we should
I'll
look
look
it
it
up.
up.
We should look up what he's doing next. I even like the guy, that does the podcast because he was on Jarecki's team. What is his name? Zach something Pontier or something like that.
Mark Smerling and Zach Pontier. They actually do a really amazing podcast called Crime Town. I think it's called Crime Town because I listened to that. It was after the Jinx, but before the second season. It's called Crime Town. They did 2 seasons, and I check Spotify like every 6 months to see if they've done another one, and they don't. I guess they've moved on. But it was such a great podcast. Really, I highly recommend Crime Town.
Oh wow, okay. Yeah, I like him. I like the whole team, honestly. Okay, so let's go back to the story. They bring you back to the family and what was going on after Kathy's disappearance, right? Because now what's happened is obviously the big verdict. Durst is out. Durst is free again. Everybody's fucking shocked. So what the story in the Jinx does is they bring you back to the family, right? And there's this Berlin Wall of silence. They bring that nephew out who's all kind of pissed about and just different. And, Kathy's friends and Kathy's family or Gilberta, your main chick, starts kicking up dust again. Like, oh my God, he's never going to, So what I want to talk about this whole Nick Spagetta and Ed Wright thing. So Ed Wright is that cop that they call that's like, hey, you did work for the family. You were hired by the Durst lawyer to then go and reinvestigate everything and make sure that Bob's story is tight and pretty much more to make sure that they're getting info from the fucking cops.
Yeah, exactly.
So what I thought was very interesting here, and this goes back to our Detective Struck stuff.
Mhm.
Okay, Ed Wright interviews Bob like 10 times or something, and you instantly know he finds the inconsistencies of the
Yeah.
phone call that night and blah 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 and all this stuff, right? And he goes in meetings, and then Bob, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit here. This will be a topic. Bob claims that Douglas and family were all in these briefings and we're all in these interviews, right, with this guy. And that guy started kind of like being like, his Bob, you're obviously lying.
Yeah.
And the family then gets rid of
Mhm.
him. Do you remember that? Like, they ended up like kind of just parting ways because he wasn't really playing ball like the way they wanted to. In particular, what I brought up last time was the whole doorman
Yeah.
thing. And this blew my mind here, and then I want to get your thoughts. Is I thought it was just the press who had said the thing about the doorman. But when they have Detective Struck looking back through the files with them, the cops actually did have in their report the doorman did see her. So someone leaked that, gave the bullshit thing to the cops, and then they said, yes, we're satisfied with Kathy being in the city on something that didn't even happen. Then when Ed Wright comes back in and re-interviews everybody, the doorman said, no, I never saw her. So this is like, okay, what do you think? I mean, what do you think about this? Because how did the cops get that fucking thing wrong?
Unless they just planted that. Like,
They
one
had
of
to
some
have.
Douglas
Like, it's
Durst or
just
Robert
fucking
Durst, or they're just taking him at his word. Or they have somebody once again on their payroll, or somebody that's on the inside that's just kind of like, yeah. We'll just put that in there. I could definitely see that happening.
It's because it's like the reason why they don't really look at Bob as much as they should have, because oh, they fucking believe the whole doorman comment, and then they believe, oh, someone called the school,
Yeah.
right? And they're like, yeah, she was placed in the city, and then they somehow just don't fucking. It's just like insane to me. So that's such like those two big pieces are just like, you know, what really changed the whole direction of that investigation, which to me is just still it's inexcusable that they would have just like, okay, cool, she just disappeared, and yeah, Bob's totally fine. So I want to ask your thoughts on Douglas, because this becomes a big theme of the episode. Bob claims that Douglas was in a lot of those later interviews with Ed Wright when he was being like, family, I don't believe what Bob's saying, before he gets fired. Doug, of course, refutes this later, which comes up in the podcast, but who knows if he's just trying to make clear his name. What are your feelings on how much the family knew and how much Douglas actually knew of what really happened here?
Well, you have people in the documentary saying, like, if it comes out of Bob's mouth, you can't believe this. He's a known liar. So everything he says, if nobody else can really corroborate it, you got to take that with a grain of salt. Douglas, obviously they hate each other, or Bob hates him. They want nothing to do with each other. Douglas knows that he's probably mentally unstable. And yes, his wife disappeared. He probably had something to do with it. How much he actually knew, for me, it seems more of a case of we just don't want anything to do with it. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark, but we don't want to even go near it. We want to, what do you call it? You want to be able to claim like ignorance if you just turn a blind eye to it.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know if Bob would have confessed. I don't think he would have told anybody that he actually did that, except for Susan, maybe.
Right.
And I don't know if Douglas was in those rooms with the cop. What did the cop say? They didn't ask him?
Right.
Ed Wright?
That he didn't, he wouldn't comment on that because he got off the phone. Remember, he was really short. He got off the phone before he said anything else. So it's only Bob saying, yeah, Doug. Yeah, exactly.
That makes me think Douglas might have been in the room. And they have so much power and so much money that they are able to just silence people like that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel that the father, maybe Douglas, definitely had to at least know, hey, this is really suspicious. Yes. And maybe Bob, at least they knew that maybe he fucking did something.
Well, and you gotta remember that he has openly been violent with this woman. Sorry, I shouldn't say it like that. With his with his former wife. This is not if you grew up with Bob, this is not the first time that you've heard of him probably being violent with someone or having some sort of issues.
Right.
You know, his issues started at a very young age. So I don't know if people that know him well, that
Yes.
it's a stretch to say that he had something to do with this.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. It's like, and they're so suspicious how silent they were, how they treated the McCormicks. I mean, that whole
It's
part of the
awful.
story is like, fuck. I mean, this was Seymour's daughter-in-law, and they didn't help him. They didn't give money. They didn't they wouldn't even talk to them about it. They basically made them leave their house. It really shows. Yes, you're trying to keep the image of the company, but the way they acted, they had to have at least. And the collect calls from Ship Bottom saying, "Hey, cool, thank you for telling me where to go dump the
Yeah,
body."
it's
Someone would had to suggest why to go to Ship Bottom. I mean, it couldn't have been all Susan
if
Berman. They were much
if they
younger
really
and like
thought that something happened to her and
so.
that she was missing, they would have tried to find her. Like, unless they
Right.
knew that, like, well, we're not going to find her because she's dead, and he probably had something to do with it. They're not going to lift a finger to help.
That's yeah. Okay. So this segues me nicely into just a thing I almost forgot about until I rewatched this
Uh-huh.
episode and the podcast. When Robert goes on the run after putting up bail for Morris Black, which is always one of the things that perplexes me, that you were like 2 hours from Canada
Yeah.
and you didn't fucking go, but instead you got arrested in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania. He actually goes by Douglas's home with guns on him.
Crazy.
And so I wonder if he just went to do a scare tactic, kind of like the Gilberta sighting, because she saw him too. Or was he really going? I mean, he's on this rampage. He'd shot Susan Berman. He's killed Morris Black, amongst maybe other people we don't know about, because that,
Mm-hmm.
that might come up in the new doc. Was he really going there to shoot Douglas, or was it just because he's crazy and he was going to all these just old places and he just had guns on him, because he always has guns on him?
I don't know.
What are
That
your
that
thoughts there?
conversation he had with his wife was very
Oh, yes,
ominous. That did
yes.
not sound like he didn't mean to do anything. It sound because she shushes him. She's like, okay, yeah. I know what you were planning to do. Like, just so he won't say it on the phone. And it sounded to me like he planned to do him
Unbelievable.
some harm. Yeah. It's
Crazy. And like,
Mhm.
now I'm just going to say, like, imagine this story is already crazy enough. Imagine if that had taken a different turn and he also caps
yeah.
Douglas and then gets to Canada and gets away. I mean, just, like, this story could have turned from one of the craziest ever to I mean, who knows what would even happen if something like that had happened on top of everything else.
Exactly. So,
It just blows my
because
mind.
initially when you're watching it, you're like, this guy, like, why is he getting it? Why does he have all this security? Why is he having a restraining order? Relax. Is it this tiny
Right.
little frail man? And then you hear about, well, no, he was actually stalking him with armed and was, yeah,
Yeah.
it's,
And he's got
yeah.
kids and like, oh my God. Okay. So then at this part of the episode, you get properly introduced to the wife, Deborah. You can tell 100% right off she knows everything. From those
Oh,
depositions
yeah.
she's in, she's almost
Hmm.
smirking and being like, what can I say? What can I not say? She knows everything. And then it's so funny how they're dating. He meets her back in 1988. He then strategically buys this $77,000 ring in 2000 right before the Susan Berman thing,
Hmm.
right? Because she probably also, if anybody else knows about Kathy, it's got to be
Hmm.
her. Because it also he gets her the ring
Hmm.
um, right after Janine Pirro reopens the
Yeah.
case too, I
Hmm.
believe. So it's like shutting her up for Kathy. She can't then say anything. And then that whole plan with Susan Berman. Okay. So this goes nicely into the Susan Berman thing that I want to recap, because I love how they go back into this. Because to me, this has got to be, of the three murders, this is the most intriguing to
Yeah.
me. Like how, like I get, or you know what I mean, like, or riveting, if you
Hmm.
will, just the planning. So, okay, one, Susan claims that Bob was coming to visit. Two different witnesses say that.
Hmm.
Okay, we learned that from the show. Durst flies in on the 19th, right after marrying Deborah
Yeah.
officially. This is the other thing that I didn't remember. He used to live in Northern
Right.
California after the fallout with the family, so he probably had property up
Hmm.
there, which is how he easily flew in, went to a house, grabbed a
Yeah.
gun, right? Because remember before I was like, well, how did he get a gun in
Yeah.
California? You're like, well, he went to Walmart, but I bet you had a fucking gun at the house. It was ready
Yeah.
for him,
Hmm.
right? And so he probably went to his home or some sort of property or rented someplace right around there. And that's how he knows how long the drive is and how quickly, you know, and he had like a car that was in there that he takes out of long-term what is storage.
Yeah,
right?
the fact that
Then
he
they
had a
even have
car there shows you that, like, yeah, he's got a setup over there.
yeah. And then there's calling card records of him halfway to LA in fucking that town. Very interesting. I didn't remember that part. And then he flies home on the 23rd at 10 p.m. Her body's found the next day. Yeah, so I want to get your... Let's just talk about this again. There's no way this is not... Of course, later we know what happens. But in your estimation, once you hear all this, it's like, I mean, come on. This is pretty obvious that it's him with all this evidence,
Yeah,
right?
once they put it all together. But had they not started investigating, like, the Susan Berman, let's see, had they not started investigating the whole Susan Berman thing, they would never have put those pieces together, right?
Totally. I'm just saying, now that we're looking at it, I'm just saying, like, just looking at these steps, it's like,
and
oh my
you
God.
pointed
I
out
mean, it's
before,
just
like,
like,
why didn't he just hire somebody to do this? Like, why go
that's
through all this trouble and maneuvering and then make these dumb mistakes when you're doing this mastermind stuff on one hand and then you're making this small, simple mistakes on the other? It's way too much room for error.
yeah, it blows my mind. And what I desperately want is to have been like a fly on the wall in the room where he probably goes through what he's going to do with his wife,
list.
Deborah, because he had to have like making his list of, okay, I'm going to fly in on this day. I'm going to do this. And then her being like, honey, shouldn't you probably not do this yourself? Like, can't we just hire Rocco, the Italian guy? Like, I mean, maybe that's more in the movies and he just wants to do it. Okay. But before I get into the California is a big state line, which is another one of my favorites of the entire show. Here's my thing again, like you said, the balls of, I'm going to do this myself. Okay. But versus hiring somebody. But then the thing is, we don't know when he showed up. Hopefully he just was smart enough to come at night.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but what if a neighbor still had seen him? And then here's the other thing. What if someone heard a gunshot and then someone sees him as he's getting to the car? How cocky, or just like, what's the word? I just can't even believe that he even thought he'd be able to do this and get away. I mean, I guess who are we talking about? But it just blows my mind. Like, everything has to go right for that plan to work.
And it did for 20 years.
I know, but I'm just so amazed. Like, no one was going to think like that's a great idea. Like, there's too many it did work, but there's too many holes in that. Don't you think? You got to be crazy to have thought that was going to work perfectly.
Yeah, well, he is.
I know. I guess I'm still trying to rationalize, but even him, like, when he's probably rationally planning, he's got to think like, oh my God, I have a 3-minute window for this to work. What if the gun goes off? And then, I mean, I guess her home, I almost need to see a map of how far her house was to other neighboring houses. Maybe they won't hear, but a gunshot's loud. There's no way he had a silencer, right?
And it's almost like he read like a detective novel and just kind of like went through the general steps of whatever they did in that novel, but there was no attention to like the finer points that you need, like the in real life that you need to follow. It was just kind of a general plan, but I feel like that's how he walked through life. He didn't really have to work or do anything. So he's like, the same way he is in the interviews. I just flew to San Francisco and then I drove to Los Angeles. What? Like, it's not no big deal.
I guess. The word I was looking for earlier is audacious.
Yes.
I mean, you have to just be like, just so confident, audacious, just like, anyway. So then we get to the California, because Jarecki, of course, tries to say, well, no one can place you being in LA, but we know you were in California. And then he just goes, well, California is a big state, and almost gives a smile. And this is just another, I would say, Jinx moment if we start naming these. Oh my God, like, what a moment.
Yeah, his matter of factness about everything is just so, it's like he's daring you to catch him in something. And then he goes right up to the line, and then up until this, he
Yes.
never got caught, but he went a little too far this time.
Yeah. So then the final thing, and they always do a great job of ending the episode, and then we'll get to the podcast in the final episode, is the son-in-law, Sarab. I forget how you say his name. He then, Sareb or something like that. You get the call from him, and this is this would have been the biggest moment, but one of the biggest moments, of course, if there wasn't the big moment at the end that they got lucky with, was him finding the other fucking letter and bringing them in, and he's kind of emotionally breaking down because he actually really loved Bob, because Bob had been fucking putting him through school at this point, and he befriended him, and he finds the other letter that also says Beverly that exact same way. What are your thoughts on this unbelievable moment?
Okay, the first thing I thought, just as a person who's, as an actor and a person who pays attention to like how things are set up and the drama of it all.
Yeah.
I'm like, they had to have rehearsed that a little bit, right? That wasn't just live on camera. Him finding the letter, like, how did he even know what he was looking for? I feel like that was a little bit like, I don't mind it, but it felt a little staged. But as far as the actual content, you're talking about the reveal that it's the same handwriting.
Well, when he finds the letter, being like, guys, I found this letter. Holy shit, it's the same handwriting. It's the Beverly misspell. It has to be him, and he's almost like in tears, and they're sitting there, and they're like, "Fuck."
The cadaver note. I don't remember.
Cadaver note had been out in the public.
Oh, it had been,
I think it had been in the papers for a long time, because remember the murder. This was like years later, and he, for all these years, he'd been believing Bob didn't do it. And then he's going through her stuff, I guess, because he was the closest relative, and he finds this other fucking note that he knows looks exactly like Beverly.
That's crazy that he was the one that believed him this whole time. That's crazy that he was the one to actually crack it open. Yeah. And
if he didn't find that, none of that maybe would have happened. So it's such a big turning point to this whole story.
Yeah, and that's what Jarecki says. He was like, this was the key to the whole thing, finding that letter. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
okay, episode 5 podcast. That was just the show. So the couple little podcast things that I just wanted to cover that you learn in the podcast that you don't get from the show is this. I love getting the timelines, because there's these big gaps in some of the years that I still am like a little confused by. So in 94, that's the year that Douglas took over. And it does say in the podcast, because I always say, why is Bob insulted when he wanted nothing to fucking do with the company? Again, we were right. It's just pride. It's ego. Because they say in the podcast, in 94, Bob does get a little bit insulted, even though he didn't deserve the fucking, he wanted to be asked, like you said. He just wanted to be the guy, even though he's a piece of shit, and he didn't even like want to be with the company. He's the older son, and he just wanted to be like, well, it goes to you, Bob. And then Bob would have turned it down and given it to Douglas. Your whole analogy of, well, you just want to be like asked.
He's the eldest boy.
Like I'm the last one.
Remember that? I actually thought about that too. That's actually similarities in the family to the to Succession, to Rupert Murdoch's family, because I do believe that it's 3 boys and a girl in the Murdochs as well. So I was noticing, oh my gosh, this is another Succession type situation. Yeah.
Yes. And so, and it's just so, but like, it's still just silly to me, because it's one thing if Bob had also been a great worker, or at least try, but we know he was like burping in meetings. He was smoking weed, like in his office. He didn't want to come into work. He wanted nothing to do with it. So to me, this just more, to me, it just shows more of how crazy he was to then, and then, because then in 94, this is what's key here. He then leaves the company, stops talking to everybody, moves to Northern California, which is now how I know he has property in Northern California, which how he did that whole thing to Susan Berman, because now he sets that murder much more easily. He's got a gun somewhere stored. Okay. The last thing that I want to say, last couple things here that are important, was, just again, like him going to Douglas's house, which just blew my mind with the guns. And then the final thing was that really weird meeting between Douglas and Janine Pirro. Yeah. Remember they talk about that? That's not in the show. That after this meeting, she kind of lays off a little bit on the case, which I was kind of shocked by. what did you think
Well,
of that
because
whole
he
thing?
basically asked her, like, I don't want members of my family to be interviewed. I don't want them being dragged into this because they could have some insight into the case or about Kathy. And so they
Yeah.
clearly, behind closed doors, had an agreement of like, look, we want as little to do with this as possible. Please don't involve my family. And so, what, once again, the money that, I mean, they're one of the richest families in New York City. I mean, at one point there's a cop in the
Yeah.
show that says, well, it seems like if he was worth a couple $100 million, he'd want to find out about his daughter-in-law. It's like a couple $100 million. They're billionaires. I looked it up right now to 2024. The Durst organization is worth 8 billion. So back then they
Wow.
were definitely worth at
Yeah.
least a billion. So that kind of money has a lot of
Yes.
power to get people once again to just stop talking. Stop, Bob. We don't want any involvement. Let's make it go away.
Yes. Okay. So, real quick before we go to the final episode, any other Stafford notes I missed from this one that was a real hot topic that you were dying to talk about,
that
or did we cover the big
that was
points?
the big points, definitely. Oh, I was just gonna say that, like, I was trying to remember back to the time when the story, because they were showing the clips of like the Daily Show and like when it was kind of, they were making fun of
Oh my God.
it on
Yeah. Yeah.
SNL, and I was like, do I remember? Because it's hard for me to remember post Jinx and pre Jinx. So I do vaguely remember hearing about this guy and the popular culture and the media, but I had no context for who he was
Mm.
because I didn't know that he was some like real estate heir in New York. And even though I used to live in New York, I didn't know who he was when I lived there. So I was like, Durst. And then when the Jinx came out, I was like, oh, this is the guy they were talking about. Okay.
Yeah. I don't, and it's funny that you say that. I don't remember. I wasn't paying attention at all. I didn't know about, I mean, maybe I had heard the name vaguely, but I love the Jon
Oh,
Stewart
yeah.
clip. That was
Yeah.
unbelievable. I had it actually that down too, of like something like Durst, who chopped up body, claims
Right.
self-defense. Like it, and that just shows how insane that whole thing
Yeah.
was. Okay. So let's take another little commercial break. Okay, and we're back to the show for the final and earth-shattering episode of the Jinx, episode 6. This episode focuses on, on Bob's second interview and all that comes with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just one of the greatest
It's
episodes
Chef's kiss, nailed it,
in TV
stuck the
show
landing,
history.
couldn't have been any better. They didn't even know what they had, that they were sitting on a gold mine until a year and a half later. Yeah.
So, okay, what they do to start off the episode, and I got a lot of different topics here, is like they replay the bit about him initially talking about the cadaver note, about it. Well, you're taking this big risk. Only the
Right.
killer could have written the note. And then they kind of set you up again, because even though he said that earlier
Yeah.
in the show, they bring it back because now that they have both notes, they have both, or they have his handwriting from what the son-in-law found, and now they're going to hone in on
Right.
that. So a couple points here. Kathy had a cadaver, which I thought was a crazy part of the story. Remember, like,
Well, she was a
it
medical
is true,
student.
normal people, unless you're in the medical,
Yeah.
right? And she supposedly said that all the time to
Right.
Robert, right? My cadaver this.
And here's the thing.
Then they go to the handwriting.
I was just
Go
going to
ahead.
say,
Yeah.
he's the one that brought that up too. That's another link that he didn't have to make for them, but he did it anyway, because it would have taken them a second to realize, oh, she was a medical student. There's a reason why he would have used cadaver. He brought it up. So I was like, oh, dude, you're helping them.
Right. I know. So then they go to the handwriting specialist, and this part is like so intriguing. I'm riveted at this point. I'm on the edge of my seat. It's unbelievable. And he says, well, you need to find more examples of the writing. So they find other examples and different forms he had to fill out. And then I love how they looked at it, like, well, you can't just do one word to the next. You got to do a bunch of different N's and a bunch of different G's or B's or whatever the hell it was, right? And then basically, from this guy, you can't believe how much of a match it is. Like, the specialist pretty much confirms it right there. He's like, man, this is pretty bang on. And then from there, Jarecki has to almost sit back, being like, because he was like all of us. He kind of he was friendly with Bob. He wanted to almost believe Bob because they had this relationship for years. I mean, at this point, He's known him for probably 3 years. They've been hanging out since 2010. And even though he thought maybe he was guilty, now he's like, oh my God, this is like
also
100% it's
he's
him.
not an investigative journalist. We have to remember that. He is a filmmaker. So he wasn't out to like get Bob. That wasn't the whole point of him doing this. And now it's turning into, oh my gosh, we've got this guy. What are we going to do? So I get how he's conflicted about, we were kind of like on the same side, and now I'm kind of his ops because I'm about to put this guy away potentially.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting that they're dynamic.
Yeah, so that'll come. I'll bring that up too in the podcast. We'll end with that of their thought process at this point. What do we do with this evidence? I'll come back to that because remember, they have to be like, oh my God, what do we do? We want to finish our film, but we also want to tell the police, but we don't want to do it too early and then they take our fucking shit. So anyway, I'll come back to that, but that's like it now. Also, the other thing that I thought was a bit striking was he now realizes that Andrew now realizes that when they are going to accuse Bob, he's almost putting himself in danger weirdly. And I never thought about that because he has a family too, right? So I thought about that was an interesting turn of the mindset of, hey, we're just buddies with Bob, to where like, oh shit, we might be taking him down. Does that put me in danger?
Well, I would be very cautious if I were them, because yes, it does put you in. He's stalking his own brother. So, and especially if he feels like you betrayed him and you're about to put him away, you've got a target on your back as well.
Oh my God. So, okay, then this interesting part of the episode, they want to get this next interview because they need to have the whole thing, and they need his cold reaction to it. They know it's going to take the doc to the next level, which of course it did. Because if you didn't have this whole last part, it wouldn't have been the same doc that we all know and love. So then the back and forth, and the Bob starts distancing himself. He probably starts realizing, what the fuck am I doing here? Why am I doing this?
That's
Bob plays, hardball.
I had a question about that. How many times had he actually sat down with that? Was it only once?
It was only 2 big interviews. He had done the commentary with him.
He had only sat down for an interview with him once before he got cold feet and was like, oh, there's a red flag here. I shouldn't do this.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yes, correct. But a lot of time. So there's 2 main interviews. One was 2011. One was 2012. Okay. And but there was the commentary. So he did. There was a lot of other meetings in hotels and, early on. So, but as far as interviews, yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So there's the back and forth. There's the lie about Madrid, which is just hilarious. It's like still lying.
Well, the funniest.
Oh yeah, Barcelona.
The funniest part was him being like, "Are you kidding me? The guy does nothing but lie, and you believe this part?"
Zach Pontier guy was like, are you guys fucking kidding me that you're shocked? They're like, yeah, but we didn't think you'd be lying about just what city he's in. But yeah, that part, I love that fucking part. Funny. It just shows that like you never know you can never really trust Bob and what he's saying, right? Okay. So then Bob agrees to do it, and now they're planning. I loved how they brought in the behind the scenes stuff now for this one, because they had to show you what they were all going through for production wise with the setup for this big ending. And I really loved how didn't you find it fascinating that they were showing, okay, he's going to come in here, we're going to show him the note. Okay, no, do show him the note now, and like all that stuff.
Yeah, you did a peek behind the curtain on that one as to what they finally turned the cameras around on themselves as to what their thought process was. And I love when the guy shows the note of like, Bob's been arrested again. Because he can't say it because they're on the phone. Yeah. I like that.
Oh my God. Yeah. Cause that was just another weird one where he goes back up to this. He gets arrested for getting to Douglas's fucking house in New York again. Okay. So he agrees the back and forth, he agrees to do it. They do all the preparation. And then, of course, we get to the famous cadaver note scene. And I got to say, like, rewatching it, I probably wasn't as tense rewatching it this time as I had been in the past, because the first time you watch that, crazy. You're like, holy fucking hell.
That is such gripping TV. I was on the edge of my seat when I first saw that. Like, what is going on? What is going to happen right now?
he boxes him into a corner. I mean, the whole burping and the like. He's obviously
Yeah.
distraught. He's thinking in his head, "Holy shit, what do I even say?"
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he still tries to be like, "Well, it's block letters," and he tries to come to his normal
Yeah.
Bob responses, but it's like I don't think he can really do it that well. Then he realizes he's kind of fucked
Yeah.
there,
And it was his
right?
own do. Oh, yeah. He's realizing that he got it.
And
Yeah.
so, what strikes me here before we go into the whole ending and these is it just blows my mind that it's a fucking film crew doing this and not the
I
cops.
know.
It's like
Well,
how like
there's been a lot of cases,
you know
especially now with internet sleuths, that are solving cases that cops have just bungled or have ignored or have just let, go because they're too overworked or, well, I don't want to like say like, oh, cops are, suck, but for whatever
yeah.
reason, the case was just allowed to either get cold or wasn't solved. And then just regular people are the ones that solve it or help solve it at least.
Yeah, so then going back to his response, obviously he just realizes he's kind of dead in the water. He doesn't even really have the normal, quick, calm Bob responses. He's basically, well, I didn't write that. Yeah, I wrote that. Yeah, they look pretty similar. And he's just totally out of it. And he realizes, oh my God, you realize it's almost like sad watching it because you're just, oh my God, like
Well,
it's so obvious that it's
the moment where
him.
when he puts the two signatures or the two Beverleys on top of each other and says, "Well, which one of these didn't you write?" Even though I've seen it 4 times,
Oh,
I gasped at that part. I was like, "Oh my God, there's no way that he's going to be able to answer this. There's no way. He's totally caught on that one."
and it just goes back to just like what just writing the cadaver note is also so dumb. Like I just there's no better way. Like I know he did it because he was obviously your
And
friend, but it's like you said last time, you just shot her. How is that your friend? You just shot her in the back of the head. Get the fuck out of there. Don't go gallivant Beverly Hills and write a
another
note.
unforced error, or sit down at a computer and type something like anything but write out in your own handwriting and leave it for the cops to just it's mine. It's just
I just I don't even know what to
yeah.
say there. And then you think that could have been the showstopper
Right.
already to end all showstoppers. And then of course, the famous scene that we've all been waiting for. And here's the weird thing, and I just finished the podcast. You'd see how he accepted, yes, I'll take a sandwich. They're like, cool, we'll box that up for you. If they hadn't brought up the sandwich, he might not have
He would have
stayed
just
to go to the
left.
bathroom. You see how that
Yeah.
happened? So that was weird because Bob was so calm. Yeah, I'll take a fucking sandwich. And then he's like, oh, I'll go to the bathroom in the meantime, waiting for to get the sandwich. I mean, maybe he still would have gone, but I'm just saying these weird little things.
Right.
And then, of course, he
Or
goes in with the fucking microphone.
if he had decided
Yeah.
to eat the sandwich there, he would have just sat down and eaten the sandwich, and there wouldn't have been this hot mic moment. They would have probably come on, take the mic off of him, and
I mean, they already had him dead to rights, so you didn't even need this thing because the letter is already enough, and that's obviously what gets him taken down 2 years later. But so he goes in, he's got the mic on, and this is to your point. He just jibber jabber,
yeah,
and
it
at
makes
first he
no
says, "Well,
sense.
you're caught." That's the big one. He says a bunch of weird shit because he's probably his head's reeling. He's probably like, "Oh my God, what the fuck have I done?" Let me try to act normal, but like that was really bad. And then of course the famous, and it's really like a bit of a slur on words, but he definitely says, "Killed them all," of course, which is the big famous line. And to your point, they end it perfectly. There, the lights go dark. It's just dramatic, cinematically. Like, give us your thoughts because we talked about this off camera earlier. Your thoughts on that amazing
The
ending?
ending was perfect to me, because they end on this bombshell. It couldn't have you couldn't have planned it any better, and they didn't plan it. It was a complete accident. And instead of just, oh, let's have an epilogue or let's cut away and have a little talking head with somebody, or chirons on the screen, or text overlays saying of like what happened afterwards
Yes,
or some little
yes.
thing, they just leave it like that. It's just basically fade to black, and that is it. And that is all. That is the perfect dramatic ending to this story. And wants it leaves you wanting more. What is going to happen next? Yeah, it's great.
Right. And so, yeah, that's why we said from the beginning this might be the best ending ever. I mean, just the story, the twists and turns, and then to have not only the letter ending, and then like you said, And here's the interesting thing is I guess you don't learn this until podcast season
Mhm.
2 about the footage, about it being there for a year. And then I think it was like an intern or something that was helping them look through the hours of footage, finds the fucking footage. Right. And so I want to end with, we started with something. And remember when we first started the show last week, and I told you the timeline. I said, okay, they meet Bob in 2010. They do the commentary in 2011. They do the first Jinx interview in 2011 and Jinx interview 2 in 2012. Then the Jinx does not air until 2015.
Right.
Bob has 3 years. Now let's revisit. Remember what I said is, how the fuck do you not get out of Dodge? And now that we've just looked at all of this and our audience is experts like us, again, it's bewildering to me that now it's still only 2012 when they have that interview. He realized, he even says in the bathroom, you're caught. This is not good. But then he still decides to just stay.
Yeah.
What are your
It's
why not at least get the fuck to Europe? Or I mean, maybe because all his friends are here and he's like, what am I gonna do in Barcelona?
I don't know if maybe he thought that there wasn't a way that they could build a case against him.
Really prove that wasn't good enough.
I guess he felt that, well, I got away with murdering Morris Black. They can't open a case. Like, he doesn't understand how double jeopardy works, or.
But this is a different case.
No,
this
that's
is
what I'm
Susan
saying.
Berman.
He doesn't understand how. He's like, I got away with one murder. That I'm good for all
Should
other
be
murders.
Enough. I know. God damn it. It just it stuck in my head again when I rewatched this, was that original question I posed to you, and I'm just like, wow, like, and I jumped ahead, and I'm gonna save this, but I already know when he gets arrested, the timeline exactly. Let's wait until maybe we do our episode 3. So if the audience is dying over these, we're gonna come back and do an episode 3 of season 2. But before we go, I do want to bring up, okay, here's the couple things from the podcast that we're not in. So, they match the letters, right? From the son-in-law. They realize, holy shit, this is a match.
Yeah.
They then have to figure out, what do they do as a production company? And they sit down, they say, what are our goals? 1 was to seek justice. 2 was to make a great film, even though I feel like
that's the opposite.
They should have flipped those.
Is that what they said?
I think Andrew was trying to sound... Yeah, in the podcast.
That wasn't his goal.
He's trying to sound like he's a great guy. Goal number 1 is make a great film. Goal 2 then should have been seek justice. And then goal 3, what they said, not get in trouble throughout this process to be able to do 1 or 2. But they should have, I think he was trying to sound like he's a great guy. Once
again, like what I was saying, he's not an investigative journalist. He's a filmmaker. His intention was to make a film. Yeah.
Yes. So either way, they have a tough decision to make. And I know I'm jumping ahead, but this will just be a little preview for everybody for later. They decide to give the cadaver note info by 2013. So they take about a year from that interview and their editing before they give that to the police. Just so everybody's clear of the timeline. And then I'll save what happens later in 2015 for our next episode. Yay. But the other things I just got to say is, I love the behind the scenes stuff. I know I mentioned this already, but God, I love the behind the scenes stuff preparing for the cadaver note scene. I love seeing like what Zach had to act as Robert. They did all these different possibilities. That I thought was an amazing addition to the show, because you're like, oh, this is great. Or to the podcast too, of him being like, him saying, well, it's black letters. And exactly what he ended up saying. He said. I love that little piece there. Yeah, that was amazing. So I recommend, if you guys are Durst experts like us. And then also, and I don't know why they didn't put this in the episode. I thought this was weird. He also basically interrogates him about the dig note in the podcast.
Oh, the dig note,
he has Bob. I'm surprised they didn't put that in the episode. Yeah. Why would you have edited that part out? Because that would have also been, I mean, it was only another minute or something. Like, they only wanted to have the cadaver. Why not have the fucking dig note also? Because that was another thing of like, oh my God, they made him read that as well. Okay. So one other thing that I had promised that we were going to discuss, remember how there was that commentary that I didn't have time to go all the way back in episode 1? I just want to cover a couple things here. So a couple things that come out in the commentary that are never in the show and they're never in the podcast, just for the Durst freaks that are listening and are just loving this. One thing that was crazy was right before Kathy's disappearance in the commentary, and it was actually going to be in the show, but Andrew edits it out. Bob had a different secret girlfriend named Prudence on the side.
Dear Prudence.
And he claims, well, Andrew, we were both having affairs.
Whoa.
That they were both now having affairs. Him and Kathy. There was another new girlfriend that was in the picture. That was another weird bit to it that they never bring up in any of the docs.
Wow.
And even Andrew knew about it and somehow it got cut on the cutting room floor. I don't know why. That could have been another, especially for motive. You're already now dating someone else. I mean, maybe he always was.
Well,
but
to me,
that
would mean that you would not care as much about her wanting a divorce then if you already had somebody else on the side.
That's true. So like, yeah, why? And let her go. It must have just, that's why we go back to it was a weird fight. He took it too far. Maybe he didn't care about the divorce. But again, it's the weird Bob thing.
It doesn't
Rational
make
thought says he doesn't care. But this is ego. No, fuck you. I own you. Because it seemed like she was more property to him near the end.
And then Jarecki also says that in the last episode, he was like, I come to realize that he's a lot more volatile than I initially thought. Like I fooled myself into thinking that he was a rational person, and I'm realizing
he's
that
a rational guy.
Rational guy.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, a couple other things that come up in the commentary, and I mentioned it last time. The neighbors saw a blue light in the basement, Kathy's disappearance. That was only in the commentary. I've never heard that before in any other area, so I wanted to bring that up. Oh, they do show it in the movie?
They show the neighbor looking out and seeing the light in the,
Okay, got it. Okay. Here, this was another one that'll blow your mind. I mean, not like that amazing, but this was another one they've never heard anywhere else. So it always seems like they never did anything on the Durst side to try to find Kathy or to Bob to like fake that he's looking for her or anything. Right. It was just like cool. But him and Susan Berman actually put out rewards for Kathy. I didn't know this. It comes up in the commentary. They put a $10,000 reward at first and they upped it to $100,000. So they did fake it. I mean, and make it look like they were trying to find her in 1982. Yeah, because
they're never going to have to pay it out.
So they did. Exactly. But I also thought it was weird, though, that wasn't at least put in any of the docs, because it makes it look like they never did a fucking thing ever. And at least he tried to lie and be like, we put a... So that came up in the commentary. I was like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that
actually would have been better if they had included it, because it would make it even more diabolical that they were putting out these fake reward notices.
Fake rewards, exactly. So I thought that was weird that was never in there. So I knew you would like this, if anybody. And then here's the other thing, and I mentioned this earlier. I just don't like how there's this gap from 1982 she disappears, then the cops just kind of it's a missing persons case, and then it's just like nothing. Like I almost kind of want to see like what happens from 82 to 99 now, of course, before they reopen. It's like 17 long years go by. I guess he's just working for the family. Nothing's really happening. It just blows my mind that like the cops are not trying to figure out what's happening. They're not pressing him more. Like what happens in this whole basically 20-year span? Yeah. It's like, it's sort of just like these missing years of the story. Yeah. So I hope in the Peacock doc that I told you about before, where they're going to go into the new doc about stuff from the female victim's perspective. And maybe there's other murders that come out. Maybe they're going to talk about other years. Because I'm sure her family, her friends were still like, what the fuck is going on in Furiously, you know? Okay.
When is that coming out?
I already mentioned, still just in development. I don't even have a date. So we're probably a year or so away. Sadly, I need it like tomorrow. Because I'm dying for more now. Then the last couple of things was, we already talked about this, but the passport thing, we brought that up. That only came from the commentary. I never heard that in another place, where he had given the passport to his lawyer, which is maybe why he couldn't go internationally, during the Galveston time. Oh, this was another one that I mentioned last week. During the Galveston case, the judge had to put a gag order on Jeanine Pirro right at that time, because they couldn't have it be a fair case if she was going out in the press saying, he's suspected for this and he's suspected for that. So he actually was going to threaten charges on her, the judge in Galveston.
Well, Jeanine Pirro did have a history of like kind of what they were saying. She did definitely, she was very vocal during the O.J. Simpson trial. she eventually had her own talk show and her own, like, she definitely wanted to be in the public eye as a talking head for a lot of this stuff. So
Yeah. So anyway, it was just an interesting part of the story because she almost had to kind of like stop her, you know, crazy campaign against him at that time, and then that also almost helped him get less heat on him later. So it was just an interesting thing. Okay, and then again, I know we already mentioned this, but I just wanted to bring it up again. Even though he gets, and this is not part of the commentary, just a final note. Even though he just got popped live with the cadaver note, he still says, "Yeah, I'll take a sandwich." I gotta say,
and he's specific. What kind? Roast beef, turkey, and tuna.
I'll take a turkey and a roast beef. I think he's taking 2.
I mean, I can't blame him. I love a good sandwich. So, but yeah,
I just love, like, if it was me, I'd be like shaking, like, get the hell out of there, and have one of my Marlboro Lights that he doesn't have a care in the world. You know what I mean? I'd be like,
He's missing
oh my
that
God.
gene or whatever. He's missing that little that we all have that makes you feel. I mean, I guess it's just sociopathy. Or narcissism. It's just, he does not feel that at all. He doesn't feel that level of, oh no, oh shit.
So anyway, everybody, before I do my big outro and we dance to the tunes again, I just want to thank you again for coming on, Stafford.
Yes.
I hope this has been great for the listeners. If we start getting crazy listeners and amazing feedback, we will come back and do an episode 3. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Thank you for coming on. Was this not a blast? I mean, to be able to talk about this fucking thing. Oh my God, this is unbelievable. I think I could talk about this story endlessly. Okay, so thanks for listening to the Wally Report, the world's hottest podcast. Please subscribe, follow, comment, like, share, and blast. We're on the Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on YouTube. We're blasting hard on the talk, and we're heavy on the gram. At the Wally Report. That's at the Wally Report. We've actually been posting amazing video clips from our episodes on our social channels and important new show launch information. So don't miss out. And please make sure to comment on Spotify, on YouTube, on the gram, on the talk. We love the comments and we love the interactions with the fans. So with that, we're going to jam one last time.
Cool tunes.